Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. And welcome to part 3 of our in-depth look at U.S. pop culture in the year 1971. In this episode, we'll be going over the months of April, May, and June, the second quarter of the year, talking about records, movie releases, television, pop cultural events, and, of course, what our old friends the Beach Boys were up to during those months. So let's begin with records. On the album chart, as April kicked off, the #1 album in the country was Janis Joplin's Pearl album, featuring its hit single, Me and Bobby McGee, written by Chris Christopherson. Reaching its peak at #2 was the soundtrack from the hit movie Love Story. Jimi Hendrix's Cry of Love was at its #3 peak. There were 2 albums that had started the year in the top 10 that were still there. One of them was at #4, Jesus Christ Superstar. This would eventually go to #1 on May 1st, 1971. In the #5 position was Andy Williams' Love Story album, which would peak at #3 at the end of April. At #6 was Chicago 3 with its hit Free. This had gone all the way to #2 shortly after its release back in February of '71. At #7 was the Three Dog Night's greatest hits package, Golden Biscuits. The other album still in the top 10 from the beginning of the year was Santana's Abraxas album, which was at #8. This had been the #1 album back in November of 1970 and was still in the top 10 as April began. At #9 was Elton John's Tumbleweed Connection. This had gone to #5 shortly after its release in March of 1971. And rounding out the top 10, hitting its top 10 peak, was Barbra Streisand's album Stony End. Turning to the singles chart, sitting at #1 was Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me by the Temptations. This was a surprising bit of counter-programming from what was the closest thing Motown had at the time to a political group. It was a song of unrequited love from a group whose recent hits had included Ungena za Ulimwengu, Unite the World, Ball of Confusion, That's What the World Is Today, and Don't Let the Joneses Get You Down. It was surprising to hear a love song coming from the Temptations early in 1971. Great track, but still a surprise. At #2 was Janis Joplin's Me and Bobby McGee. At #3 was a preview for the new Carpenters album, For All We Know. At #4 was Tom Jones with She's a Lady. And at #5 was another surprise from Tamla Motown. Up to this point in time, Marvin Gaye's Stock and Trade had been love songs, but here was a song of social consciousness, a preview for his new album, What's Going On. At #6 was Ike and Tina Turner's cover of Creedence Clearwater's Proud Mary, and at #7 was the Partridge Family with Doesn't Somebody Want to Be Wanted. The Partridge Family's TV show had premiered in September of 1970 and had become vastly popular with kids and young teens. They had apparently originally envisioned this as a vehicle for the Cowsills, but kind of understandably had decided that they were better off to get actors to play musicians than they would be to get musicians and try to have them act. So they came up with a cast that was always billed as starring Shirley Jones as Shirley Partridge and featuring David Cassidy as Keith Partridge. David Cassidy, of course, became a huge teen heartthrob, appearing on covers of 16 magazine and Tiger Beat. The cast also included former teen model Susan Day as Lori Partridge and irrepressible young Danny Bonaducci as Danny Partridge, the hilarious money-grubbing capitalist of the family. Danny arguably provided the template for such later lovable materialists as Alex P. Keaton and Gordon Gekko. There were also 2 younger kids, Chris and Tracy Partridge, who rarely had a line between them. There was also a dog who got about as many lines as those kids did. That part of the family could easily have been billed Gilligan's Island style, just as And the Rest. But the core group of Keith, Lori, and Danny were immensely popular among kids and young teens, and there was lots of merchandising. There were lunchboxes, bubblegum cards, dolls, there was a Halloween costume, there were books that you could order through school, such as The Partridge Family in the Haunted Hall. And of course, there were records. Their first album, the Partridge Family album, had been released in late 1970, and it had come with a full-color portrait of the family. Their new album, which the hit single was featured on, Up to Date, came with a book cover that you could put on one of your school books. And on the back cover of Up to Date was what was billed as the greatest offer ever to join the Partridge Family Fan Club. For $2 plus 25 cents rush handling, you got a 45 RPM record, a complete book, The Private Lives of the Partridge Family, a Partridge mini poster, autographed portraits of each star, Partridge stickers, autographed wallet-sized photos of every cast member, a secret decoder which would allow you to decode messages from the fan club columns, an official Partridge Family membership card, plus much, much more groovy stuff. I actually joined the Partridge Family fan club, and you know, I don't think I got the 45 RPM record. I've heard that record since then, but I have no recollection of hearing it back in the day or having received it back in the day. I think they still owe me a 45 RPM record. I did get a bunch of other stuff, including a lot of flyers for other things I could buy. Sadly, the only item from my Partridge Family Fan Club kit that remains is this bunch of temporary David Cassidy heart tattoos. And yes, they are temporary tattoos. I had really no use for a bunch of David Cassidy SWAC tattoos, so these just got thrown in a drawer, which is why they survived. I did think that Lori Partridge was pretty cute, however. One thing I could never figure out about the Partridge Family was they were supposed to be a rock group, and yet they were always playing in these supper clubs where there were these long tables and people in ties and evening gowns having beef brisket while they listened to the Partridge Family. And I had heard that rock concerts were supposed to be pretty wild, so I could never figure out what was supposed to be so wild about those people sitting there having dinner and listening to the Partridge Family. But hey, I was 10. Anyway, Partridge Family was very, very popular with my age group, slightly younger, slightly older, and this was about the height of their popularity. Getting back to the top 10 singles, at number 8 was Sammy Smith's country-flavored Help Me Make It Through the Night. At number 9 was Andy Williams' version of the theme from Love Story, and at number 10 was Another Day by Paul and Linda McCartney. It had been nearly a year since the release of the McCartney album had heralded the breakup of the Beatles, and Paul hadn't released anything in the meantime, which was a long time by the standards of the day, and particularly a long time by the standards of Paul McCartney. When the single was released, it was met with great derision by the critics, who compared it to a commercial jingle. They said it was trite. They disliked the fact that Linda was credited on it. Nevertheless, it did go to number 5 on the charts. Elsewhere, April 20th, 1971 heralded the second annual Earth Day and the launch of a new anti-littering Keep America Beautiful ad campaign with a TV ad featuring actor Iron Eyes Cody. On May 12th, Mick Jagger married Bianca Perez Mora Macias at a star-studded wedding in Saint-Tropez. At the time, many people found it outrageous and hilarious that wild, hippie, anti-establishment Mick Jagger was doing something as middle class as getting married. It also seemed like a sign of the changing times that the wedding of a rock star was getting coverage like a high society or royal wedding. In another sign of the changing times, on June 5, 1971, Grand Funk sold out all 55,000 seats for their July 9th concert at New York Shea Stadium in 72 hours, breaking the Beatles' long-standing record. One night later, on Sunday, June 6th, the final Ed Sullivan Show was broadcast. The show had been running since practically the birth of commercial television in the U.S., having started in June of 1948. Ed's musical guest on that last show was Gladys Knight and the Pips. On June 13th, with anti-war protests still raging across the nation, the New York Times published the first installment of the Pentagon Papers, a series of classified documents about America's involvement in the war that had been leaked to the media. The front page story ran just one column over from coverage of Richard Nixon's daughter Trisha's wedding. In April, our old friends the Beach Boys began working on their new album in earnest, recording things like Day in the Life of a Tree, Don't Go Near the Water, and Long Promised Road. Dennis was particularly productive with tracks like Barbara, 4th of July, Old Movie, and Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again. Though the details of the session, of course, weren't known outside Beach Boys circles, it certainly appeared as if Dennis was going to be playing a major role in the new album. In late April and early May, the Beach Boys went on tour. For live dates, they had signed with the Millard Agency, which operated out of offices above the Fillmore East in New York. They certainly began playing hipper venues, college campuses, rock festivals, and even the Fillmore East itself. On April 27, 1971, they made a surprise guest appearance with the Grateful Dead at the Fillmore East. This certainly helped their hip credibility, and if nothing else, let people see that they were, in fact, a great live act. In another sign of the changing times, on May 1st, the group played to a huge crowd on the Mall in Washington, D.C., many of whom were there to kick off the first of 5 days of anti-war protests in the Capitol. On May 7th, they taped another appearance on The David Frost Show, performing Wouldn't It Be Nice and Cool, Cool Water. The show was broadcast on May 28th. On May 24th, the Beach Boys' new single, Carl's Long Promised Road, backed with Deirdre from the Sunflower album, is released. This was the first release track showing their new direction and would be included on their upcoming album tentatively titled Landlocked. Sadly, the single failed to chart. In June, sessions continued for the new album with work on Bruce's Disney Girls, as well as the legendary unreleased Smile-era track, Surf's Up. On June 11th, Dennis seriously injured his hand when he drunkenly put it through a glass window. He wouldn't be able to play keyboard for 6 months, and he wouldn't drum with the Beach Boys again until 1974. Though he continued to appear on stage as a singer and keyboardist, Mike Kowalski temporarily replaced him on drums on stage, followed by a new guy, Ricky Fattar, from the South African group The Flame, whose recent album Carl had produced. Meanwhile, in that second quarter of 1971, there were many notable new album releases, including early in April, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's double live Four-Way Street album. Also released early in April was Elton John's live 11-17-70, or in the UK, 17-11-70. This was from a live radio performance and was issued mainly to thwart a number of bootlegs of the show that were already in circulation. The album went to number 11 in the US and number 20 in the UK, so that's pretty good for a live album that they never really even meant to release. Also released during that period was Poems, Prayers, and Promises, an album by an obscure singer-songwriter named John Denver, who was having a big hit with his single, Take Me Home, Country Road. Released in mid-April was Maybe Tomorrow by the Jackson 5, as well as Survival by Grand Funk. The Doors' L.A. Woman album, which was heralded as something of a comeback, Rolling Stone went as far as to call it their best album yet. The Best of the Guess Who came out in April, as well as the Rolling Stone Sticky Fingers with its landmark cover by Andy Warhol featuring a real zipper. It also was the first release on Rolling Stone Records with its cool new Lips and Tongue logo. May saw the release of The Carpenters' self-titled album, as well as Ram by Paul and Linda McCartney. Again, the critics were laying in wait for McCartney on this. There was a lot of anti-Paul sentiment at the time, him being seen as the unhip one that broke up the Beatles. Critics called this trite, meaningless, uncreative, bourgeois, middle-class garbage. Of course, time has done a lot to reverse those opinions. Now it's revered as one of McCartney's finest albums. Not so at the time. McCartney later admitted that he was surprised by the hostile reaction, since he had in some measure recorded this with the critics in mind. Though it missed with the critics, it hit with the public and reached number 2 on the chart. Aretha Franklin Live at the Fillmore West was released on May 19th. Also released in May was the landmark What's Going On album by Marvin Gaye and the number 1 Rod Stewart album, Every Picture Tells a Story. And we'd had solo releases from Crosby, Stills, and Young that we talked about in earlier episodes. Now it was Graham Nash's turn with Songs for Beginners. June brought the Donny Osmond album with its number 7 hit, Sweet and Innocent, as well as new albums Tarkus from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Joni Mitchell's beloved Blue album was released in June. And Stephen Stills followed up his self-titled debut with Stephen Stills 2 in June of 1971. In movie releases in that second quarter of 1971, we had such notable films as The Summer of '42, released early in April. Melvin Van Peebles' landmark Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song was released late in April and became the highest grossing independent film of 1971. Another independent film, Tom Laughlin's Billy Jack, was released on May 1st. It did well on its initial release in 1971 and became huge on its re-release in 1973. Also in May we had the third Planet of the Apes movie, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and the Abominable Dr. Phibes, starring Vincent Price. On June 18th came Willard. The posters said Ben would do anything for Willard. As we found out, the main thing Willard wanted Ben to do was take his horrible, abusive boss, Ernest Borgnine, and tear him up. Also released was Clute, for which Jane Fonda would win an Oscar for Best Actress. Released on June 30th was Carnal Knowledge, and on a completely different note, also on June 30th, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, starring Gene Wilder. I hope you're enjoying this deep dive into 1971 pop culture. Whether you remember those days or not, I hope you're finding it evocative of the times. Next time we'll talk about the third quarter of 1971. Then we'll concentrate on the Surf's Up album, which of course was released in that third quarter. Then we'll wind up with the fourth quarter of 1971. Then we'll go someplace completely different. But hope you're enjoying this. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, and comment. Love to hear what you think about this, and we'll see you next time. Bye.